Coming to you from BRIC House in downtown Brooklyn, this is 112BK. On the show today, a Brooklyn church's new abolition effort. This time, it's taking aim at sex trafficking. The importance of diversity in covering criminal justice, and nurturing artists in East New York. Hi, I'm Ashley Ford. Thanks for joining us. Can I tell you what really bothers me about the DACA situation? Of course I can, you're already here. How many folks seem to think that deporting young people who've done nothing but live their lives in this country will in some way improve their own lives? This bothers me because I've done enough reading of history to know that this is how despots thrive. By picking a scapegoat for our ills and pretending that the eradication of that scapegoat will ensure a prosperous future for all of those who really deserve one. Americans will always have complicated issues to face. That is the reality of living in a complex society. We could either face those issues with a nuanced reflection on our own history of bad behaviors, or we can find scapegoats. Today, the scapegoat is immigrants. Tomorrow, who knows? People who look like me, people who look like you. Anyway, on the show today, a new abolitionist movement takes aim at sex traffic, diversifying the coverage of criminal justice and planting the seeds of art in East New York. But first, these things. The stable genius is at it again. This time putting a 30% tariff on solar panels and cells. Industry observers say this will put a dent in the fastest growing job provider and fastest growing green energy technology in the country. So why is he doing this? Does he hate job creation? I don't think so. Does he hate green energy? Maybe. But apparently he's doing this at the behest of two large domestic solar companies who say they're hurt by the cheaper imports. Other companies and consumers, however, benefit from them. Two Brooklyn companies in the solar industry who get 80% of their supplies from abroad say that while this is a kick in the gut, they had been expecting such a move. So they priced it into their 2018 projections. Sure, in the short term, fewer people will go in for solar and fewer funders will invest. But eventually, they expect sanity to prevail. Here's to hope. Let's hope sanity prevails. Speaking of the future, El Chapo, the so-called drug kingpin who was extradited from Mexico to a Brooklyn jail last year, says he won't kill any jurors who sit on his trial. Therefore, there's no need to keep them anonymous and give them armed protection, as prosecutors have requested. The request, they say, comes out of the defendant's long history of violence and an alleged propensity to whack witnesses. Lawyers for the accused say these special arrangements would send a message of guilt, that their client is dangerous, and therefore bias any jury. They have a point, but then the prosecution might have to narrow its jury pool to only those who've never seen The Godfather. So, good luck with that. Speaking of staying alive, how do you swim with the sharks without getting eaten? Ask Bed-Stuy's Kyle Donovan, who just won $100,000 on ABC's Shark Tank for his invention that could solve a problem most people have likely encountered. Ever find yourself at a party with a buffet, you want a plate of food, you want a drink, which do you get first? Because you can't hold both at the same time and eat, unless you opt to mash your face into your plate to eat your salad. But Donovan has a solution called iPlate and iCup, a set of interlocking dinnerware with a cup that slides into a slot on the bottom of the plate. The utensils also adhere to the plate. Now, if it could also work as headgear, you could free up both hands to do whatever, but I don't know how that would work. We'll be back in a moment with our next guest. In the 19th century, Plymouth Church in Brooklyn Heights was famously outspoken against the existence and expansion of slavery in America. Now they're embarking on a new abolitionist movement, this time against sex trafficking, which persists to an alarming degree throughout the country. The church will be hosting an event on Sunday, January 28th to address this issue as Human Trafficking Awareness Month winds down. Here to tell us about it is Beth Fleisher, chair of the church's new Abolitionists. Thanks for joining us today, Beth.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell me, starting off, just a little bit about the history of Plymouth Church and being an abolitionist?
Okay. It's a very interesting church in that it was formed, the congregation was formed to fight slavery.
Right.
Their first minister was Henry Ward Beecher. He was a famous abolitionist and also the brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe, who is, of course, known for writing Uncle Tom's Cabin. He waged an amazing fight, PR fight, against slavery and the Civil War, and carried on and on and on about what was going on in the South throughout his ministry. And he was always at the forefront of social justice issues. But our history doesn't stop there. In little bits and pieces, I can tell you things like Branch Rickey of the Brooklyn Dodgers met with our minister at the time in order to discuss hiring Jackie Robinson, and we all know how that turned out.
Wow.
Jackie was hired, so that's pretty cool. Martin Luther King Jr. was a friend of one of our pastors, and so he came to Plymouth and preached from its pulpit a very early version of his I have a dream speech.
We just had one of your parishioners on a couple weeks ago to talk about when Martin Luther King Jr. came to Plymouth Church, and she actually met him.
Yes, indeed. That was Grace Faison. But we feel that having history is wonderful, but we really do need to act out our faith in our community today. We can't just rest on our laurels.
As you talk about moving forward and looking at new things and being active in your faith and obviously in your activism, sex trafficking is what's coming up. Sex trafficking is what's come up. Can I ask you really quickly, because I think people in general have an idea of what sex trafficking is. More and more people are starting to understand that it happens right here in America, which is good, that people are becoming aware of that. But one of the things that I think people still wonder is, who are the quote-unquote buyers?
We don't really know, because it's still the case that many buyers, Johns, even if they're picked up, they don't really get prosecuted. A very, very small number of these people who buy sex illegally here in New York City, are ever prosecuted. There is a program that the Brooklyn DA has called Respect, where those who are picked up and are prosecuted, if they are first offenders, are put through this program, Respect, in order to come to an understanding that buying sex is both illegal and, let's just say, immoral.
Do these men understand that they could be involved with someone who has been sex trafficked?
I can't speak to that. I've actually never spoken to a John. So I'm really sorry, but I would.
No, that's all right.
I would like to think not, but considering the conditions that most of these trafficking victims are held in, where they're performing 50 sex acts a day, where they're in terrible conditions, where they look physically unwell, where they may have been hit recently. I can't believe that anybody could look at these people and think that they're not in some sort of dire situation.
Who are these women? Who are these girls? Who are these people who end up in the sex trafficking industry?
It's not who you would think. So first of all, I would like to say that this goes across gender. So while the largest proportion are female, there is a proportion of males.
Absolutely.
And they're in just as dire straits. This cuts across all boundaries. It's all ethnicities, all socioeconomic brackets, all ages. But particularly and most disturbing, the average age that someone enters the sex trade is 13, 14, or 15. And you may ask why, and that's because children at that age are very malleable, because they're still children. And what happens is pimps befriend them, and I would say that in air quotes, and then bring them into the trade, disassociate them from their families, disassociate them from their friends and communities, and that's the end of that.
And do you, I mean, I'm wondering, do you make the distinction, because I read about it so much, between someone who has been sex trafficked and someone who has entered into sex work? Or do we think that,
trafficking, the official definition of trafficking through the UN and through other governmental agencies, international and national and state, is are you held in that job for which you're not getting paid by force, fraud, or coercion? So those are the key words: force, fraud, or coercion.
All right.
So if you're not being paid, and if you're being held against your will or made to perform work, labor, against your will, that's trafficking.
Right. Sometimes I feel so devastated at the idea, especially of young people and of children.
I learned about this a few years ago.
Yeah. One of the ways that I first heard about this a few years ago is that in my hometown, my old home, Indianapolis, Indiana, when the Super Bowl came, very soon after, there were different reporters and different pieces that went up about how when the Super Bowl comes to town, that's one of the busiest time for sex traffickers.
And they literally, these pimps, and I'm going to keep on using that word because it's a negative word, and I want there to be a negative connotation here.
Absolutely.
These are not good people.
Right.
These pimps are transporting trafficked peoples, trafficked victims, from state to state to state, and if they're underage, that's even another law that's broken, in order to service people at the Super Bowl.
Wow.
Yuck.
Yeah.
I mean, yuck.
Yeah. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
I've heard reports of girls, 10, 15 girls shoved into a van and driven for hours and hours and hours, winding up someplace where they don't know where they are, and then being forced to do sex work.
How'd you get involved in this work?
So I'm not a counselor. This isn't my background, my professional background at all. As a member of Plymouth Church, we are actively encouraged to, as we say, act out our faith in the world. We don't just stay and inside our own little community, inside our own little bubble. We want to reach out and help people.
Right.
It was brought to our attention about 5 years ago or so that we had this really great abolitionist past, but as we said at the beginning of this, there's a lot of work to be done in the present.
Right.
So I thought about it a while, and I was looking for a way to make a difference in my community. And I said, well, I'm going to learn about this, and I'm going to see if there's anything that we can do here in Plymouth that makes sense.
Right.
And so I spent about 10 months doing a lot of investigation on my own, just on the internet, and then going to meetings of various organizations, and figured out that there was something we could do.
Wow. Can you tell me really quickly about the event and when it is, and for people who want to show up?
So this is Plymouth Church in Brooklyn Heights. The address is 75 Hicks Street, plymouthchurch.org, because it's all there. From our homepage, you can find all the information about the event. We're getting Vanessa McAvoy from the Brooklyn DA's office, from their human trafficking unit, to come talk to us. We're getting Lieutenant Christopher Sharp from the NYPD's human trafficking team to tell us what to look for in our community, what numbers to call, what to do to end trafficking. We're seeing this incredible movie, and then at the end of the movie, we're having a Q&A where we're actually going to be able to talk to two women whose lives are portrayed in the film, and the DA's office, and the NYPD, and people from this organization, and just really interact and ask questions.
So there's going to be a lot of information
and a
lot of opportunity for people who are interested and who want to help to figure out how to do that.
And the point is, you can help, and it's an education event. You can't do something if you don't know, and when you leave, you'll know what to do.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us.
And thank you so much for our time.
Appreciate it.
Your time.
Thank you. When it comes to the criminal justice system, a system that documentaries, reports, and analysis have shown was built by and for the interests of white men, one way to start changing that narrative is to open up the media to opinions held by people who aren't white males. How do you lower the barriers of entry for other voices? Here to talk about that is Donovan X. Ramsey, the first commentary editor for the Marshall Project, which covers the criminal justice system in depth. Thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Can you just start by telling me about what the Marshall Project does in your words and also your involvement with it?
Yeah, so very simply, the Marshall Project is a non-biased, nonprofit news organization that covers the criminal justice system. And our real goal is just to illuminate and sort of shine a light on what's happening in the system and on individuals who are impacted by the system. Yeah, we're the only outlet sort of dedicated to that work. I'm the commentary editor at the Marshall Project, and my job is to field opinions, essays, perspectives from all over the criminal justice system, from all over the country, and to be able to sort of present those on the site in a way that sort of drives home a lot of the work that we do on the news side.
And you also write.
Yeah, I do.
You write.
Yeah.
Don't just say edit. You write as well.
Yeah, I write as well.
How does that work for you, the changing of voices, especially with, this issue that is so high tension?
Yeah.
Emotions are high around issues of criminal justice and injustice, as they should be. So as a writer and an editor, how are you bridging those two worlds?
Yeah, it's very interesting in that. So I actually started my career as a writer, and as most editors do, and then sort of moved to editing over the past few years. And I've only written a few times at the Marshall Project, and mostly because I want to encourage other people to contribute to the site, that I sort of really want to be able to bring in voices and make people comfortable and sort of not think that the organization has any sort of institutional voice or opinion, or that in some way I own one area of coverage.
Right.
So I try to balance it by writing about things that I feel especially passionate about, and things that I can't get other people to write.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that the Marshall Project does that I've noticed is that there's a diversity of writers. There are all kinds of writers offering their opinions on criminal justice and on some of the more pressing issues of our day. We're seeing, I think, some shift there, right? Whereas these cultural commentaries used to mostly come, and they probably still mostly come from white men, we are seeing a shift that more different kinds of voices are being included. But what about on the editing side? Are we seeing a shift there as well?
I would like to think so, that there are a few sort of big outlets, the New York Times, the Atlantic, the Washington Post, that are sort of bringing on editors from diverse backgrounds to sort of bring in different voices and new voices, to sort of edit those pieces and to assign those pieces to writers of color, to women writers, to LGBTQ writers. And I think that's ultimately good for the industry, that, when we think about sort of what media is, oftentimes it's the byline, it's the name out front. But, as sort of you and I know, behind those sort of very upfront things, there's an entire ecosystem of people who are creating media and sort of what we think about the world. And it's something that we pay a lot of attention to at the Marshall Project, and something that I try to do as an editor of color is make sure that I'm thinking about diversity first. Or not necessarily first, but I'm thinking about diversity in sort of...
Sorry, go ahead. No, you're good.
Yeah, that I try to think about diversity in every decision that I make, especially because we cover an issue that is so deeply impacted by questions of race and racial justice.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you trying to change the way people see the world?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that the dream? That's the goal?
Many journalists are sort of afraid to say that, but I think that sort of embedded in the mission of a journalist, which is to present information and to contextualize it, right? That there is a sort of question, to what end?
Right.
And that what we consider to be important about the world informs the stories that we follow and the questions that we ask and the way that we present a story. So I'm not afraid to say, I very much want the decisions that are made in our society to be informed by as much information as possible and as many views as possible.
Right.
So to me, I feel like that's the whole thing.
What are some of the pieces that you've assigned over your tenure as the commentary editor that have just made you really proud and felt like you've really put some of your best work into them as an editor?
So one piece that really stands out is a piece that I published right after the killing of Jordan Edwards, who was a 15-year-old young man in Texas who was killed by a police officer. That officer is right now sort of having his case adjudicated. Right. And of course it came at the end of a long list of police killings of unarmed black men and women, boys and girls. And at the time this comes after many years of covering criminal justice and really at a loss for words, right, about what to assign, what to say if I was going to write something myself.
Right.
because the hard thing about being a person that edits commentary around criminal justice is you have to make exciting and new and interesting to an audience something that they're very, in many cases, numb to.
Right.
And I was talking this over with a friend of mine from undergrad, a Morehouse brother of mine. I have to shout out Morehouse.
Mm-hmm.
And
y'all always do.
we always do. We always find a way.
You do.
And he's an educator here in Brooklyn. And we were talking about the case. And one of the things that he mentioned to me is just how difficult it is as a middle school teacher to go to school and to try to make kids care about sort of whatever the curriculum is when they live in a world that is so threatening.
Right.
So all the kids want to do when they come to class is talk about what they're seeing in the news because they're so impacted, many times traumatized or re-traumatized by it.
Right.
So I just asked him to just sort of put down his thoughts on paper, and he came back to me what I thought with what was a really beautiful essay about the experience of being an educator in these times that we live in. And you know, it was sort of a very quiet piece, but one of the things that I really appreciated about it was, you know, teachers are some of the most common folks, you know, in our society, and they go to and work in many of the places that police officers do, and they have different experiences, perceive young people differently, it seems, than many police officers do. And he was able, I think, to sort of articulate what that perspective is and add it to the conversation.
Was there just like a nugget of wisdom somewhere in there? Was there a line? I feel like there's always a line. There's always an image or a line.
Now you're putting me on the spot about how I remember the
No, it's okay. I mean, but I just feel like in a lot of pieces like that, there's always a moment where I think to myself, that's the moment. Like, that's the shift. Like, that's the thing that really, you know, gets to the heart of what's happening.
Well, you know, I mean, I sort of can't think of specific language, but what I do remember him writing in the piece is he sort of pointed out the fact that Jordan Edwards was, according to reports, a straight A student.
Right.
And that one of the things that he's charged to do as a black man in his school, one of very few black male educators in the school, is to encourage kids, right, to sort of be those exceptional students.
Right.
And he was asked by a student why should he care, right, about his schoolwork. If a young man like Jordan could be a straight A student, a star athlete, and still be gunned down at 15 years old, and he was at a loss for words.
Yeah.
And he, in a way that I think was very sort of vulnerable and real, talked about being at a loss for words as an educator. Yeah.
Well, Donovan, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I would love to have you back sometime to continue this very important conversation about your work at the Marshall Project.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. One of our next guests said of East New York that it's a forgotten land peppered with media horror stories, be they about crime, gentrification, dysfunction, etc. But she's helping to change that narrative. Her name is Catherine Green, and she's the founder of Arts East New York. Thanks for coming on the show, Catherine.
Thank you for having us.
And she's joined by Alexis Mena, Public Programs Manager for the organization, which seeks to preserve and highlight the culture of the community. Welcome to 112BK, both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Catherine, it's been 9 years since you started the organization in East New York. Can you tell me what it feels like to be in this new space?
Boy, it feels incredible to be in a new space, but like we've been doing this work inside and outside of walls for the past 9 years, and coming up on a decade of work in the community is a tremendous opportunity to continue to serve more people in this neighborhood and do tons more work that needs to be done.
Absolutely. Can you talk to me a little bit about, because people always bring up gentrification when you start talking, especially about Brooklyn. How is that affecting the work that you do there right now?
Wow. So our work centers around using the arts as a tool for social and economic change. You know, we have different focuses where we focus on economic development and, you know, health and sustainability. And so in the past 4 or 5 years, gentrification and displacement has become one of our focuses as well. Right. So with that, we do exhibitions around, you know, identifying resources for community members to know that what skills and what tools are available to them in order to remain in the neighborhood and fight the forces of market pressures in East New York. We also are part of a coalition, the Community Coalition for East New York, which we are now about to produce a film series to educate people around gentrification and what it really is, corporate entities that are chunking off, portions of communities all over the country,
right.
And creating a systematic way and to remove people from neighborhood. And
Right.
so.
And you, with Arts East New York, Alexis, you're working in public programming, so you're directly to the people. You're out here.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that and about that work that you do.
Well, my career in public programming has really arisen from my previous career in real estate and finance. And recovering from the ills of capitalism, I was reacquainted with my creative ability. And I decided to take the knowledge of financial literacy and skill sets that I acquired in finance and bring them into the art field. And when I met Catherine, when I first met her, I was a teaching artist. So I went from teaching artist to project manager and now public arts manager. And that transition has really helped inspired me to show that I can influence my community, that I am influencing my community, and that public programming is the way I go about doing that.
It's fantastic. I mean, not just the answer, I mean, just the work is fantastic. Catherine, can you tell me really quickly, what's next?
Gosh, there's so much that's going on. We are relaunching our Renew Lots initiative, which is where we take vacant land in the community. We use shipping containers, retrofit them, and use them for local entrepreneurs in the community as well as local artists to, boost economic development in the neighborhood. We also have a jazz brunch series, which is going on, which is so fun and amazing. But we pair a jazz artist with a local chef, and that fundraising effort helps us to fund our youth program, our music and arts program that we run, which goes on Saturdays and then during the summer. And last but not least, we also are doing a film series, a film festival in partnership with our coalition, which will highlight gentrification and displacement throughout the country. And so,
That's fantastic.
Onwards and upwards.
Onwards and upwards. Alexis, really quickly, people who are interested, people who are artists, people who just want to support, where do they go to find out more?
Oh, well, the first place is we have a brick and mortar location in East New York at 534 Livonia Avenue, but we have an online presence at artseastny.org. And there you'll be able to see more about our own programming that's happening in the community. We have a great newsletter where we try to collect as many resources and what's available in the community and try to share that with people in our mailing list. But I would say, if you're not an online person, come down to our offices, and our space is amazing, and you'll fall in love with the artwork and the people that we have there.
Fantastic. Thank you both for being here, for the work you do, first of all, and also just for coming on and letting people know that this resource is available to them. It's really important, and I appreciate having you.
Thank you so much.
Good, thanks. Appreciate you too. Thanks for having us.
And that's all for today's show. Next week, we'll be back with Eric Gonzalez, the Brooklyn DA, a Brooklyn Young Republican, and a discussion on the anniversary of airport madness after travel ban 1.0. Hope to see you then.